Well, it's 11 o'clock. Let's get started. Good morning. I thank you all for being with us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Meredith Jacobs, and I am the CEO of Jewish Women International. JWI is the leading Jewish organization working to end violence against women and girls. JWI is also the co-founder, along with Seed the Dream Foundation, of the I Believe Israeli Women global movement. I Believe Israeli Women stands in solidarity with Israeli women and fights the denial and disinformation of the sexual violence of October 7th. I want to begin by recognizing that today is day 471 since October 7th, 471 days that our hostages are under Gaza. And just mere hours ago, less than that, three of our hostages were released. Romy Gonen, Emily Damari, and Doron Steinbrecher. Romy turned 24 in captivity. She was abducted from the Nova Festival. She was a waitress at Chez Vivi in Tel Aviv and loves to dance and travel. Emily Damari is 27. She's a British citizen who was raised in Israel. She loves the Premier League club Tottenham and musician Ed Sheeran. Emily was taken from her home in Kibbutz Kfar Aza, and Doron Steinbrecher was 30, is a veterinary nurse who holds Romanian and Israeli citizenship. She was also taken from her home in Kfar Aza. And I begin this way intentionally because Romy, Emily, and Doron are more than hostages. They are more than survivors. They are women, they are daughters, they are friends. When the I Believe Israeli Women delegation was in Israel this past May, every survivor we met with said to us when we asked what we could do, they said, "Tell my story." And they said, "We are more than survivors or victims." So we begin by recognizing their humanity. So, with that framing, I want to begin our conversation. I am here today with esteemed colleagues, members of the Dinah Project in Israel. The Dinah Project is a group of experts in the fields of law, gender, and civil society. And after October 7th, they came together to merge their multidisciplinary knowledge and skills to become the leading resource for recognition and justice for the victims of October 7th and future victims of conflict-related sexual violence. Professor Ruth Halpern Kadari is the founding academic director of the Rachman Center for the Advancement of the Status of Women at Bar Ilan University Law Faculty in Israel. She completed 3 terms on the UN Committee on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, also known as CEDAW. She served twice as a vice chair of the committee and as the first chair of the Working Group on Inquiries. She is a graduate of the Yale Law School and is the recipient of numerous awards and recognitions for her works in human rights and gender policy. She is a member and co-founder of the Dinah Project. Justice Nava Ben-Or, former judge on the Jerusalem District Court and deputy state attorney for criminal matters. Justice Ben-Or is an adjunct professor at the Faculty of Law of Hebrew University. Included in her work is advocating for policy changes regarding childhood sexual abuse and chairing a committee of a youth organization examining the sexual vulnerability among LGBTQ youth. She is a member and co-founder of the Dinah Project. Colonel IDF attorney Sharon Zagagi Pinchas, former chief military prosecutor of the IDF, has held numerous senior positions and prosecuted complex and high-profile legal cases during her 24 years of service in the Israel Defense Forces. After retiring from service, she specialized in representing victims of crimes and their families, protecting and promoting their rights under Israeli law. Sharon is co-founder and director of the Dinah Project. Maya Shakin is the director of international relations at the Israel Women's Network. Between 2021 and 2024, she worked as a welfare correspondent, news program editor, and producer at IDF Radio, focusing on reporting on women's rights, care for people and children with disabilities, and assistance for the elderly. And finally, Ita Prince Gibson, award-winning international journalist and lecturer. Ita was previously the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Report. She is the Israel editor of Moment magazine and a frequent contributor to Foreign Policy, Time, and other foreign and domestic publications. She is the recipient of many awards, has taught political science and gender studies at Hebrew University and at Brandeis University. And before transitioning to journalism, Ita worked as a clinical social worker and pursued postgraduate studies in the Harvard Medical School system, where she specialized in psychosocial trauma. So you can see this is the panel to be speaking with today. They have graciously agreed to be with us for about 90 minutes. I do have a series of questions for them, but please post any questions you might have in the chat. Should there be time, I will pull from these as much as I can. So Ruth, let's begin with you. You have briefed the UN Security Council in a special session back in May about the situation of the hostages. Can you suggest the proper framing for our discussion today as we're entering the first phase of their long anticipated release? Specifically, what are some competing interests when thinking about their release with respect to those whom we suspect were subject to sexual violence?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Meredith. And thank you, I believe, Israeli Women and JWI for convening this webinar, from one day to the other. But it is really, I think it is very important for us as well to be here together with you and share this very, very emotional moment. Discussing some of the very serious issues and not simply being hooked to the screens, because that is in fact one of the problems that we see. And maybe I'll just mention that one thing that all of us were very, very busy doing just before going on this webinar is sending an urgent letter to the IDF spokesperson, to Gal Hirsch, who is in charge of all the missing and captives on behalf of Israel, and a long line of other other addressees, urging them to call on to the media in Israel that they all come to an agreement to respect the privacy and to refrain from repeating what actually took place in the previous time when the first hostages returned in the first hostage deal back in November of 23. And I think we'll talk about it later on in the webinar. But I want to go back to the issue of framing. I think we should all bear in mind that our mission, the Dinah Project mission, and JWI, and I believe Israeli Women, is to achieve recognition and justice for the victims of the conflict-related sexual violence, CRSV. We're going to refer to as to CRSV in this webinar. And achieving justice can be done in many, many ways, including aspiring for historical justice. But we know that achieving justice and achieving accountability for perpetrators of CRSV is always a very, very difficult task. The ICC, the International Criminal Court, has hardly any convictions on CRSV. And we are facing a particularly challenging situation with respect to the victims of October 7th sexual violence committed by Hamas. And we know the reasons for that. Primarily, the lack of survivors who are able to speak and the lack of physical forensic evidence. We don't need to repeat all that. But what we have to bear in mind is that the October 7 attack did not end on October 7. The ongoing sexual violence in captivity should be seen as one continuum, as a continuing the crime perpetrated on October 7. And whenever we want to raise the argument to prove that Hamas was employing sexual violence as a weapon of war during its attack on Israel, the attack that began on October 7, then everything that went on in captivity is as relevant. And I'll just mention, I mean, we have other cases in history. That was the case with the Yazidi women's sexual slavery in Iraq. That was still is the case with the Chibok schoolgirls in Nigeria taken hostage by Boko Haram, and that is the case with our female hostages in Gaza. And now they're on their way back. And we know at least some of what they endured. We know it from those who returned. And again, we may go into more details later, but I don't want to do that now. But we also know how critical it is for the mission of achieving justice. And this mission of achieving justice is a very, very important part of public interests. But then there is obviously the interest of the survivors themselves. And this is actually the question, the need to balance. Is there a need to balance? Or maybe the overriding principle should always be the privacy and the respect and the absolute control of the survivors themselves, and let them decide and not even dare to breach any part of this, even for the sake of achieving justice, even for the sake of ending the impunity and ensuring the accountability of the perpetrators. This is the dilemma. This is the tension. And I'll just mention that internationally, most of the protocols that deal with this, and also the framework of women, peace and security, the various security councils decisions over the years, and the SRSG, the special representative of the Secretary General on sexual violence in conflict, who also issued many policy papers, and general recommendations by CEDAW, they all agree on the prime interest of the survivor-centered approach. But we have to ask. We have to ask whether there is some kind and how to balance these conflicting interests, and that's the way that I see the framing of this issue.
There are so many things I want to follow up on. I know others will be adding. Can I just, Ruth, ask you quickly when you mentioned the way things were handled with the Chibok girls, with the Yazidi women, are are you anticipating anything differently by the way these various international groups will look at the Israeli women? Do you anticipate that they will be held similarly, especially as you move forward with some of your cases? Is there anything that's worrisome about them being from
Uh,
Israel?
if I understand your question, I think that we Israeli and Jewish women are facing a harder task because of the denialism and because of the immense fake industry and all the allies of Hamas, whom we know to help them in this new battleground, which formed immediately after October 7. So the situation is probably more challenging and harder in that respect, if I understood correctly what
Yes,
you're.
that's what I didn't. That's kind of what my gut was, but I wanted to hear from someone who was an expert that was the case. Nava, if I can ask you, and really following up on what Ruth was sharing, we most likely will never know the full extent of what happened. Um, Speaking as a judge, can you share, in your opinion, what does the world have a right to know, and what do we not?
Okay, so maybe I will ask you a different question. I think the question is not does the world have a right to know? I think the world has an obligation to know. With knowledge comes acknowledgement, comes accountability, comes responsibility, the opposite of denial. Acknowledgement is crucial for initiating a long and excruciating healing process, both for the immediate victim and the community to which they belong. And I want to stress this last sentence. Of course, the immediate victims are those who suffered the most horrendous acts, but the character of conflict-related sexual violence is so that it is actually directed to the community from which they came, all these victims. And if you now walk on the streets of Israel, you go to the square in Tel Aviv, and I just got a notice in my WhatsApp group that there will be a gathering here in Jerusalem at 8 o'clock, where we always gather every Saturday night. We all feel victims. And this is something which we need to hear as a community. So the obligation is to know. This is only the beginning. You cannot start healing without everybody acknowledging the fact that we were hurt. That said, the obligation to know does not necessitate exposing the detailed injuries inflicted upon the victims or their physical or mental condition. We must respect, we must remember, I'm sorry, we must remember that at the core of any act of sexual violence, the victim's autonomy is taken from her. The victims lose control over their body. Therefore, exposing details of the sexual violence violates the victim's privacy and autonomy once again and disrupts the healing process. So it's very important to bear in mind that the most crucial aspect of rehabilitation, of healing, is to gain control again on your life. And if you deprive a victim of her privacy, of her autonomy, you not ask her, what is she willing to expose? Is she willing to talk? And you just expose her, you actually deepen the results of the serious results of the sexual violence that she suffered. So my answer is this: yes, the world should know that Hamas weaponized the bodies of women and men, and we should acknowledge the fact that also men were brutally abused. The world should know the extent of the cruelty of the 7th of October attack. The world should know the scope and nature of such atrocities, but the world has no right, in my mind, to violate the privacy of the victims.
Thank you, Nava. Sharon, I want to turn to you next. Like thinking of these this tension as Nava pointed out, the need to know, to fight back against the denial, to seek justice, and holding sacred the survivor's ability to move forward and to have autonomy over what they want to share, if anything. Um, from your vast experience representing victims and victims' families, can you share what went wrong previously? And by this, I mean, what lessons can we learn from about how the hostages were released in November 23? What you hope is done differently, what you may have even seen already with the three who were released today. And is there anything that should be done even differently from that with those who experience sexual violence?
Thank you. Thank you very much for hosting us here. So I want to thank you, I believe Israeli Women and JWI. I just want to follow up what Nava said. I think that the fundamental principle of representing and victims and victims' families is to bring the control back into their hands. It's one of the most fundamental principles. The other one is privacy that Nava also talked about. And we know that the hostages in the last deal, they return after about 50, 60 days. Now we're talking about 470 days. And captivity itself is a horrendous experience. And we know that the hostages were harmed in different ways, including conflict-related sexual violence. And they are returning with a trauma that nobody can really imagine or express. And even if they tell what happened to them, I don't think that anyone could understand it, except maybe for those who returned the other time. And what we saw the last time, and I have to say that I didn't watch everything that was covered today, but I watched some of the material that was shown on the media. Before and now, it seems like a media circus. There are crews that are stations in various places, and a lot of footage is put on television. And what happened the last time was, first of all, that the hostages that were released, they were photographed from the minute they were released from Hamas. Of course, we cannot control this because Hamas, this is one of his aims to broadcast what the release, and to broadcast it's for him, it's a part of his propaganda and part of manifesting his power. And also today, so they were they showed really it looked like a circus. There were more than 100 thousands of Hamas people with their ribbons in their heads. And I really feared for a few minutes for the safety of the hostages. So of course we cannot control this, but the media can control what they choose to broadcast. And just as the videos the Hamas released from the hostages when they were still in captivity, not all of the footage was shown on Israeli television. The choice was given to the families to decide whether to broadcast it or not. So I think that the media should be very careful on what she is showing from beginning till the end, because last time we saw footage of the release, and then footage of the hostages coming to Israel, and then footage from the hospital, and footage from the family first meeting with the hostages, and then footage of hostages, like it was like parading the hostages. And I think we were taking out the control, their control, to decide what do they want, how do they want it to be shown and manifested to the public. And I think that most of them, if not all of them, would rather that everything will be kept privately and not broadcast live. And I think this is one lesson that we should learn. I'm afraid if I'm right about what I saw before, this lesson hasn't been learned. And what Ruth said in the beginning, that is why the Dinah Project has issued a letter to decision makers and spokespersons in various organizations and bodies, imploring them to ask the media to act with restraint. And the other subject is the subject of privacy, because we saw the last time that doctors and medical crews were talking and giving information about the physical statue of the hostages. And we saw a month ago, a few weeks ago, a publication from the health department, health ministry, that was supposed to be submitted to Dr. Ellis Edwards in the UN, and they didn't submit it, or as far as we know, they didn't submit it, but they did release the publication to the public of the report containing of a lot of information that invades the privacy of the hostages. And even that they didn't name names in the report, many people could have recognized the identity of the hostages that the report was relating to. So I think that the other part is to keep a very tight lid on the privacy of the hostages, to not release information. And if the government decides to release some information later on to, like, Undersecretary Pramila Patten and other people that will come to investigate from the UN, it should be sealed. It shouldn't be made public. Only if the hostages themselves, or families, in case of hostages that are not that hasn't returned yet, only if they agree, give their agreement to the publication of the information. And these are two principles that were not kept properly the last time, and I'm hoping that this time they'll be kept as needed.
I so respect everything you all are saying. I know I've had conversations over these many months with Israelis where I've said I've seen evidence, probably more than most, certainly not as much as you all have, and we are, as Ruth said, also fighting on that battlefield of social media and mis and disinformation and denial. And I would say, why aren't you sharing what we know? Why aren't you sharing the evidence in order to raise awareness, to change minds, to do something? And the answer has always been out of respect to the survivors and the victims and their families. And I think that's such a hard choice to make, and it again shows the difference between the way Israel is handling this and the way Hamas is. The way Nava said that Hamas is about the CRSV is the trauma to the entire community, and one way to do so is by broadcasting and sharing and putting on social media what has happened. So Maya, I want to ask you, because you were the news editor of Galil Zachal, when the first deal happened and the hostages returned, so you were in the media during that first time, but now what are the complexities, kind of building off of what Sharon was saying, that the media is now going to face in this new phase of the return of the hostages?
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss this important subject. I think it's a very complex situation because, as we all said, it's a national trauma. I mean, we were all invested in their return. The public went to protest every Saturday. We are all very invested. I think everyone has his own family that really touched their heart, and they're praying for their return. So I think it's very hard for the media not to show what's happening now. We all want to know that they are standing, that they're safe. I personally watched the broadcast just up until I joined the webinar. I wanted to know that they're safe, that they're okay, that they're standing, that they're coming back, and it's happening. So I understand the need to show that. I also understand the need for privacy, and I agree with that. But I think there is some part that we need to consider, that there is a need to know what happened in order to continue the pressure for the next deal to happen, because we know that there are still hostages there. They're still suffering whatever they are suffering, and hopefully they'll return soon. But we are dealing with a struggle that is fueled by emotions and by anger, and the information and to know what happened also helps us fight denials around the world, but it also helps us, it's very sad to say, but it helps us fuel the pressure. We are protesting for more than a year for them to come back. And we can't just ignore that fact that people are very invested in what happened to them. They're very invested in their coming back. And I think in some part they want to know, I don't think they have to know every detail. And especially when it comes to CRSV, the hostage need to decide what's is being shared. And I think it's the rule, and I'm very much hopeful that the media in Israel will uphold that rule. But I think in some parts we want to understand what happened to them so that we can speak about it and that we can make sure that there are no hostages that are staying back and are not coming back. So I think it's a part of the struggle that we can't just ignore.
Thank you. You know, I remember when I was in Israel last May with the, I believe, Israeli women delegation, we were honored to go to Sheba Medical Center. And what was fascinating and that I had not previously understood, they actually have hired psychologists and experts as well as actors, and they trained the actors to actually act what they believe the hostages will be like at different um, stages or duration of the time. What would it be like after 100 days, after 300 days? After, I don't even know at the time they were even imagining it would be as long as it has. And one of the things that as a mother pained me so much was seeing that even as their mothers would come into the room to hug them, that the released hostages would recoil in fear. I'm wondering, Ita, from your time before you were a journalist, if you can speak a little, share a little bit about what might be happening both to the survivors and their families, and can you talk about how this um, leads to the Murad Code? I know you have interviewed Nadia Murad, who is a Yazidi woman who is a survivor, a Nobel Prize winner. Um, but if you could speak to this nuance in what's happening.
Sure. I want to repeat what's being said of thanking you for this opportunity. I believe Israeli women, and of course everybody who's listening, because when we say fighting denial, the fact that people are on this call on a holiday Sunday morning in the United States is very powerful. I can speak for myself, although I'm sure it's for others, that yeah, we're believed. You know, that is a support. I'm sitting here listening, and of course, I'm sitting here with two hats on, or three, because yes, my original training is as a psychiatric social worker, working with victims of or survivors of, although we never worked, of course, with conflict-related sexual violence. At the same time, I'm a journalist. And while it's very easy to say, you know, the media shouldn't, we're always guilty. I'm kind of used to the media is always at fault. And I see Maya shaking her head, you know, it's always our fault. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. Besides the interest, and I'm not even relating to spurious interest or, you know, voyeurist interest, which I feel no responsibility to respond to on the part of the public. As a journalist, I believe that knowledge is important and an informed public is important. And it is important for people to know what happened to the hostages in order to understand how the public balances. And as a journalist, I've always been taught that my responsibility, of course, is to knowledge and to the public. As a psychotherapist, my responsibility, of course, is to the individual patient. So there's a tension here, and while I'm wearing those hats as well as part of the Dinah project, I think that they divide up through the public. There's also, as Nava said, the attack was on all of us. I think many of us are very aware of how frightened we feel. The associations that we have, where I was sitting in Jerusalem, quite safe, but frightened, and I'm still frightened. On the other hand, and these are the balances that we're trying to find, I don't want to co-opt or appropriate the survivors for our needs. They're individuals. Even if we can aggregate their experience, they're individuals. And who appointed, who gave me the right to feel their experience? I'm even talking about the 7th of October, when, never mind the nearly 480 days that followed. So all of this becomes very, very complex. There's also a question, even paradoxically, who appointed us as the guardians of the survivor's privacy? I mean, who appointed me as a journalist that I should be more respectful? Is a question more respectful? Who are, a term I've recently learned, are proxy reporters more respectful? It almost, it's so multi-layered that sometimes I say, who appointed me as the arbiter of what is moral and ethical, whether as a journalist or as a psychotherapist? It's easy if I choose only one aspect of it. I'm a journalist, my responsibility is to give information. I'm a psychotherapist, my responsibility is to take care of my patient. Most of us live in much more complex worlds. To segue from that, the Murad Code is an attempt to deal with some of those complexities. And I'm going to say that while I certainly use it in the work I do, and was not aware of it, it had not been written yet when I interviewed Nadia, could draw on some of my experiences as a psychosocial, as a psychiatric social worker who worked in trauma. The code is an attempt to say, we don't know how patients will respond, which is to respond to how survivors will respond, which is to answer the second part of your question. Again, how could I possibly understand? What in my mind can I bring up, other than listening with everything I have in my mind and my heart and my ears and my body? How can I possibly think I can understand? I can only listen, as I said, in every way that I can listen. The Nadia Code is an attempt to enforce that, and to say that it's an initiative. First of all, it's a code, is an initiative sponsored by 3 groups, by the UK, and specific arms of the UK government, by the International Institute of Criminal, it's got a formal name here. I'm sorry, the International, I'll get to it, to document, a documenting agency, and the Mawad Initiatives, which is an association that Nadia Mawad established. Its attempt is to, based on complaints by survivors, to say, let us develop a code that'll be appropriate to everybody that is involved in gaining information. That includes organizations, that includes open source investigators. Some of that, for instance, we probably saw in that report by the Ministry of Health, that some of that may have been open source and was abused in that way. Medical legal experts, and basically to say, this must be survivor-centric. Even though different disciplines come from different centric commitments, they are not less ethical, they are not less moral, those other commitments, but they are not relevant. That is what the Nadia Code, or the Murad Code, is trying to say when interviewing survivors. There's supposed to be a minimum set of standards. I'm not going to, put everybody through them. You can see them, but the idea is to be survivor centric and not harmful. However, once again, that isn't simple. As obvious as that seems, I'm going to go make that more complicated too. For instance, harmful. We know that there are a lot of charlatans out there. We know that people who have been abused may be very, very vulnerable to to other. Many may pull back. Many may want to run forward to anything that will offer them comfort. Is it my responsibility also to go find out the charlatans and the malpractice and all the really irresponsible work that's going on out there, which I am sure is. I'm not speaking of specific knowledge now, but I am speaking of general knowledge. So again, the Nadia code, the Murad code can only go so far. The other thing it does is it makes a certain assumption. There's an us and a them. The them is the survivors, and the us are the various collectors of information who once again are in some way paternalistic, or I'm not sure what the feminist word of paternalistic should be, but somehow again appointing ourselves as the arbiters of what is good, as opposed to strengthening local initiatives. In Western countries, that may be less of an issue, but then I'm drawing a distinction, aren't I, between West and or third world, or however we want to divide up the world right now. So what we're also the Murad code, I'm sorry, has absolutely no teeth. There's no mechanism, and can't be, for any kind of enforcement or sanctions on what we do. So again, we're looking at very different issues. The other thing I do want to bring up, though, is I think that ultimately not being, at least to a great extent, survivor-centric will boomerang. If only to be practical for a moment, and excuse me for not speaking in more moral terms, the less a survivor feels that they can trust, the less they will trust. The less we can earn that trust, the less we'll know. If I were a survivor of any kind of anything connected to the horrible events of October 7th, and probably even earlier, other events of group events, the revelations, deliberate or not, by the Ministry of Health would make me think a whole lot before I would go forward again. And again, so what did we gain by what we did? We hurt ourselves in the name of the very dilemmas that Ruthie raised. So I guess what I've done is complicated. I think that at any given point, we can understand. When we zoom out, it becomes much more complex.
Definitely complex. Ruth, I'm gonna ask you to follow up on all that. Can you give us some concrete examples of such ethical and legal dilemmas as happened last time and may occur now?
Yeah, so I think it actually ties perfectly well with the way that Ita ended her overview, because I can point to a very specific piece of information that was conveyed to the SRSG, Pramila Patten, when she conducted her fact-finding mission last January and beginning of February. And I had the privilege of accompanying her on that tour, as we go way back, working together on the CEDAW, and indeed the Dinah project was very, very instrumental in bringing her the first time, and we're also hoping very much that she will come again, especially now. And I stress, especially now after the return of the hostages, because when she was in Israel, she had met with the people, the relevant people from the Ministry of Health, and they relayed to her information, of course, without going into names, without giving any specific details, but very, very important information that came out of their treating the returnees. Now, this information was included in her report. And that information was crucial for the bottom line of her report with respect to the hostages, when she said there is clear and convincing evidence that hostages were subjected to sexual violence, and probably sexual violence that is still going on. Now, I have to say, honestly, I do not know whether that information that was conveyed, and again, I will not go into details, but I do not know whether that information that was conveyed by those specific doctors, whether they had actually asked for the permission of the hostages to convey it to the SRSG. I don't know. But I know that that was critical for her outcome, for the bottom line. And that bottom line served afterwards. You mentioned that I briefed the Security Council in May. All the representatives of the probably 40-something countries that participated in that session, all the representatives except for Russia, Algeria, and China, all of them started with the SRSG's report as a premise, as a given, as a fact, as an historical fact. And that is what is so crucial, so critical in our mission for our work. Now, these questions will definitely have to tackled again now as the hostages return. I can also raise another dilemma. I assume that the security services, Israel's security services, have information. They have information based on their tools, their utilities. I mean, we don't need to go into details, but they know things. They know some of the things that the hostages had endured while in captivity. Should they share this knowledge with the therapists, with the doctors, assuming the hostages themselves do not talk, do not speak? But maybe this information is actually crucial for treating them, for the process of healing. I don't think there are answers to these kind of dilemmas. And I think it's also part of what we should take upon ourselves, not alone, because we're not bioethicists, we are not medical doctors, but these questions should be tackled and they should be discussed. So there's really a whole range of concrete dilemmas that we can envisage and need to be confronted, and we need to have the tools to be able to confront them.
Ruth, you brought up Pramila Patten and the UN, and I am assuming that most people on the call are thinking about the UN, what comes next. Is there anything you can share about how things look? And can you also clear up, I think there's a lot of confusion around a formal investigation versus what evidence is already available. Like how, I think that many of us are not experts in international law as you are. Can you help explain to us what's happening and what is needed to happen at the UN to potentially put Hamas on the blacklist?
What needs to be happen for Hamas to be put on the blacklist is a follow-up visit by Pramila Patten that would allow her to go deeper into new information that has become available since the last time that she was here, new information in relation to October 7, attack itself. There had been more eyewitnesses coming up. There are therapists that are willing to speak now and to provide information. And of course, there can be new information from the returned hostages, depending on their situation and their willingness. And we should remind everybody that it was Pramila Patten to whom Amit Susana, the brave, extremely courageous young woman who returned from captivity after 54 days and was willing to share her story. And it was Pramila to whom she talked first. And after that, she got the courage and the understanding that it is actually her mission to tell the world. And then she was, we all, I mean, some of us were there in October when she was on the podium next to a survivor from Myanmar and from Nigeria and from Ukraine. And again, that was the ultimate recognition that we aspire to. So a return by Pramila Patten can be a very important catalyst for moving forward. But we also have to acknowledge that it is a goal for us. It is something that we call for and that we work for, but it might not be attained. We have to be realistic, because the UN, we know, is an extremely complex organization, entity. And many, unfortunately, many of its entities, of its organs within the UN do employ double standard against Israel, do hold anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist, and anti-Semitist sentiments, and pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas. And I mean, we don't want to go into all this discussion now, but we have to be realistic in our expectations.
Thank you. And I think I've been dealing with these issues for so long that I'm so inside baseball. And I want to thank the person on the chat who asked, who is Pramila Patten? So if Ruth, if we could go back and if you could just explain for those who may not know who she is, her title, the role she plays at the UN.
So she is Under Secretary General, Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict. So she belongs to the the New York political organs of the UN. She reports directly to the Secretary General, and she acts as his representative for everything that has to do with CRSV, with conflict-related sexual violence in all over the world. So, as she keeps saying, Israel is not the only country on my list. There are numerous countries in Africa, unfortunately, obviously in Ukraine. She has been in this position for, I believe, 6 years now. Every Secretary General appoints his own special representatives. So when Guterres steps down, so will she step down. And the new Secretary General will appoint a new special representative on conflict-related sexual violence. Now, she's a very, very important person for us, because everything that happened, I mean, this part of October 7 is directly under her mandate. Her mandate is always to collect information from other UN entities on the ground. In almost every country in the world, there are UN entities for various purposes. Israel is an exception here. Israel has no UN entity because of historical reasons of Israel's skepticism and suspicion, distrust towards the UN. So there are no other UN entities that she can withdraw information from. That is why, had she not been able to enter Israel and conduct her own mission of collecting evidence, speaking to people, meeting with healthcare providers, going to the south and seeing for herself what had actually happened, etc., had she not been able to do that, there would have been no information about October 7 in the Secretary General's annual report that always contains a chapter on sexual violence in conflict. So that's why the Israeli case is very unique in so many respects, and this is a critical one of these respects.
Thank you so much. Sharon, since we're talking about the UN, let's talk about protocols first of all. Can you explain to everyone what we mean when we say protocols? Can you speak to the challenges that exist? And I know you all at the Dinah Project are working to suggest some changes to the protocols. What are some of the next steps? What can you share about your thinking of what needs to happen right now? Sharon, you're still on mute.
Sorry. I want to talk about a few subjects, and then maybe I'll ask Maya if she can a bit to elaborate about next steps for what the government should do and what the international community should advocate. But because Maya is in charge of the event we're planning in the CSW, what I wanted to say, first of all, about the protocols, there are protocols that were made, the Murad Code that Ito talked about, and there's also a protocol that was made by the British regarding conflict-related sexual violence. Most of them deal with how you treat the survivors or the victims when they are rescued, and how do you talk to them and how do you treat them. But there are a lot of subjects that are not in the protocols, and we try to see the gaps, find the gaps, and try to fill them up. And one of my worries is that even if there were protocols, and as I said, there are protocols, there has to be a way to make sure that other countries will understand and implement the protocols. Because I was in a conference a few months ago, and there was a lot of discussion about protocols and reports regarding guidelines that were suggested. And what I asked and had no answer was, okay, there are protocols, but how do you make sure in us in Israel, what happened on October 7th was such a shock, and nobody knew about protocols. And how do you make sure that you educate other countries to implement it beforehand, not after what happened? Because when something like this happened, the first thought is to rescue and save and help. And we don't have some, when we talked to Meryl, she called it an emergency response. And I think, first of all, there should be a lot of thought about how do we implement and educate other countries and make sure that they will implement those protocols. And the other thing that I wanted to say is not related to protocols, but a shift of paradigm. Because when we're speaking about sexual violence in a country, then everybody thinks about the usual way to treat it. Someone was, let's say, raped, and now we're looking at it in a way that everyone is really used to relate to it. But when we're talking about conflict-related sexual violence, we're talking about a different phenomena, a vaster phenomena. It has specific characteristics that are different from a single case. I hate to say the word regular case. And the major things that we're trying to achieve is to make a shift in that paradigm. How do we look about the responsibility of the perpetrators and how to treat their accountability, and how do we look at the evidence point of things, because we know that most of the victims are dead, and those who survived cannot, it takes time to recuperate, so we have to shift the paradigm, and we're using existing ways and theories and methods, and not inventing something new, but using theories that exist or perceptions that already exist and try to change the way that we treat all these phenomena. And this is something that it's one of our main focuses, how to first to make how to, we use the word amplify the subject and put it out and try to make a change in shift in the paradigm. And just I'm giving the floor to Maya just to elaborate on the other things.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, so as Sharon mentioned, we are working to call for an international protocol that really standardized the response of countries to conflict-related sexual violence. We sent a statement with JWI and the Dinah Project and other colleagues to the upcoming Commission on the Status of Women that the UN holds every year, calling for some kind of protocol that really teaches countries how to handle those situations, because Israel, as a country that has unfortunately known many wars and conflict, didn't know how to handle it on October 7th, and we still face the shortcomings and their consequences these days. So we're calling all of us together for a protocol that really teaches countries how to handle those situations, as well as calling for, as Ruth mentioned, for an investigation an international investigation into Hamas's cruel use of sexual violence during the 7th of October, as we don't see, or at least we don't know of any result of an investigation that happens in Israel right now. We are more than a year in this war, and we don't see any investigation on this, on those crimes. And we believe that there must be an investigation on those crimes. The only reports that we know of are international reports by Human Rights Watch, Promila's last fact-finding mission. So we need those, unfortunately, we need those investigations, especially for entering Hamas into the blacklist. That is crucial for recognition of what happened, and this list can be a basis for sanctions to those organizations. So I think it's our main interest. Obviously, the Israeli government is supposed to have this interest, but we are advocating tirelessly in Israel for her return, as well as internationally for a protocol that will make sure that what happened in Israel and what we didn't know how to handle won't happen again anywhere, and we'll have accountability for CRSV worldwide.
Sorry, just I was about to speak. Again, with being a little too inside baseball, someone asked if you could just explain what the blacklist is, what it means to put Hamas on it, what teeth does that have? What would that mean?
Yeah, so the blacklist is a list conducted by the UN in the annual report on CRSV. That the next one I think will come around March. And it's a list of organizations and countries that use sexual violence as a weapon of war during conflicts. And we obviously want Hamas to enter the list, as we want recognition of the fact that they are an organization that uses sexual violence as a weapon of war. And we also know that it can lead to sanctions on the organization. So obviously, we believe that it's important to add Hamas to the blacklist.
If I can add something to that, blacklisting is the ultimate discretion of the Secretary General. It does not depend on a decision by the Security Council. It is his discretion according to the information that is provided in that chapter on sexual violence and conflict. And that's different from sanctions that which are under the ultimate discretion of the Security Council. Now, blacklisting does not automatically lead to sanctions. In order to have sanctions by the Security Council, you actually need a decision, a vote by the Security Council, which will never happen in Hamas case because of the veto power of Russia. So that's not an option. I mean, we will obviously always cry for that, but it's not going to happen. But it can lead to other means, which are called designations. So there is power to being blacklisted. However, we should also, I mean, because this is an educative, I think, webinar, I think that people should be aware of the allegations that are directed against Israel with respect to incidents that had taken place in the detention centers in Israel. A couple had been publicly raised and investigations were opened. We do not know what those investigations have led to, but we have to be aware that there are allegations that are being brought to the attention of those UN entities which do have investigative powers in the West Bank and in Ramallah and in Gaza, and they might send that information also to the Secretary General. So we are in a danger here that Israel might also be accused of using sexual violence as a weapon of war based on those allegations. We know it's a complex situation that Israel faces with these organizations. And we also have to admit that if there is truth to these allegations, then Israel should stand up to what it professes to be, a democratic country with an orderly judicial system, and account and press charges and put those who are responsible for that into trial.
Yeah, I want to add to what Ruth said, that we met the Israel Women's Network CEO and myself with Pramilat Patan's team a month ago, and she told us that it's not just what happens in the detention center. It's what happens, what the Israeli government does with it, what the judicial part is. I mean, if we'll hold them accountable, then it will be a whole different story, and the fear of Israel being on the blacklist will be different and minimized, because there will be a process. I mean, the UN will see that there is a process, that we are holding them accountable and that we are moving against those actions. So it's very important, just to add to Ruth's important speak.
That makes so much sense, because it's essentially saying that this is not part of
Policy
systems or policies within Israel, as opposed to looking at Hamas's systematic use
Exactly.
of sexual
This is
violence.
the difference.
Exactly.
As
Exactly. If I can step in here, I think there's,
Please, Dinah, yes.
I'd like to expand that just one layer. I think it's said, but I want to kind of say it more explicitly. One of the issues that we're dealing with, of course, is denial. And when you asked about, what else can be done, it's combat denial. There's several levels of denial here, but I think that one of them is the compounding of the citizenship or belonging or identity of a victim and their government. And we can't allow that. That's part of our responsibility, I believe, towards everybody. In other words, if I say that a Israeli victim is entitled to her human rights, to the investigation, to all of the things that we've mentioned, to the paradigmatic changes that Sharon has mentioned and Nava and the entire Dinah group are working on, then that has to be true for Palestinians. it has to be true for both Ukrainians and Russians. In other words, what we're saying is we as women want to remove this from the political argument of countries. And I know that's naive, and as Ruthie just said, that's not likely to happen, but it is something we could strive for. And to say we are upholding a sense of universal justice and universal demands, we are willing to take the risk, knowing that, yeah, we might, if our government doesn't step up, we will be subjected to everything that Maya and Shalon and Ruthie have said. And we know that. And we are demanding of our country to be the country it is, but that it should be. But irrespective of that, women, qua women, as victims of conflict-related sexual violence, are not dependent, and their rights are not dependent on the morality, goodwill, or anything else of the country of which they are a citizen. And I think that's an important statement that we have to keep. There's an awful lot of confounding between that. Victims don't matter because their country isn't a good. Russian victims don't matter because Russia's at fault in Ukraine. No, we absolutely have to combat that. Thank you for
Fascinating.
letting me add that.
I want to just bring up, there are two questions from the audience. I want to open it up both up to the panel. I feel like both questions are probably on the minds of most people. So one is really about the evidence, and the ICC claims that there's a lack of evidence of sexual violence. We all know that there's a tremendous amount of evidence. Um, can you speak to this somehow? How can the ICC and others claim there's a lack of evidence when we know there are mountains of all forms of pictures,
I
videos?
think Sharon is already related to the change of paradigm, which is needed. When we talk about a regular case of, as we said, we don't like the word regular because nothing is regular, but an everyday rape case, for instance, we have a victim, she knows who attacked her, usually. There is forensic evidence, and this is the case. This is how the case goes to court. Now, here, we don't have victims, mostly. Most of the victims were murdered right after they were abused. Those who survived are either not willing to talk or cannot identify their perpetrators. No forensic tests were done because it was all during a chaotic period of time when the soldiers were trying to stop the attack. Nobody had time to collect forensic evidence. Of course, the amount of victims didn't help. So you have to look for other kind of evidence in order to prove that this really happened. And I think we do have enough evidence to base at least the prima facie case, which shows that many, and Pramila Patton in her report actually elaborates on it. She's talking about many dozens of bodies of naked or half naked women. I don't want to go into all the details of how they were exactly found, the position in which they were found. And we have people who heard the screams of women being raped. They maybe didn't see them, but they know exactly what happened, and they heard the women screaming, "Stop it," or this kind of wording, and they knew exactly what they were hearing. So we must learn how to use what we call in legalese res gesta, which means people who hear words that are part of the act during its occurrence. So when you hear a woman screaming, "Stop it," you understand that you hear a
In
woman
real time.
being raped in real time. This cannot be an imagination. This cannot be a fabrication. This is something which happens immediately, and it's part of the act. So this is one of the ways, the evidence that we have. We have so when you collect all these pieces of evidence, you get a picture of multiple incidents of sexual violence, sexual abuse, and our claim is, and we will try to.
Oh, Nava is frozen.
Unfortunately.
I'll wait for her to
Connection.
come back, and I think where she's going is actually the question I'd wanted to end on. I want to,
Abused.
I'm,
How
oh, Nava, you're back. Okay, good.
how come if people in different scenes heard the same screams, stop it, and begging for their lives? So I think this is a way that we can actually overcome the obstacles that we have, and use it as a valid source of evidence which can satisfy the burden of proof, that you have to understand the situation.
Yes, and I want to echo something you were saying, just again, for those who are watching who may not know, it's the idea that what in the case you were talking about, when someone heard the screams in real time, that wasn't a one-off, that wasn't in one place, that wasn't in one situation. It was multiple locations happening. This is the pattern of the violence, similar patterns
Exactly.
of
The
violence that
pattern
were
is a very
happening in
important
different
one.
locations speak to the systemic use of the
Exactly.
sexual violence. Um, Someone asked, these are in some cases young women who have been held who are coming back. There have been in other cases of CRSV where there are children born from the rapes. Do you know of any? You may not know, not if there are cases of children, but what the plans are. I cannot imagine this horrific situation. Are you aware of anything they were asked with? What kind of extra supports will be given in those cases, should there be those cases?
So again, the health services in Israel are very well developed. We have physicians who are trained in dealing with sexual abuse, women who were sexually abused, and they know how to. There is a protocol. There are social workers who know how to deal with it. What troubles me, if I may steal the microphone, is that since this phenomenon is universal, we have it everywhere. Israel, with all its problems, is still a functioning country. We have professionals who know how to deal with women who were raped and maybe
I want to stress
pregnant.
that we know that there are rumors, but there is no formal information.
We don't know.
That such thing happen. It's a theoretical dilemma, but an ethical dilemma that if something like this arises, that they have to take into account. But I have to stress that there is no indication by now that something like this happened during captivity. No formal indication to it, and this is one of the dangers of social media that we talked about earlier. That rumors are swirling around all the time, the names, what happened to them. And I think that we all should be very careful in dealing with this and treating these things, because even as we try to analyze such a theoretical dilemma, then maybe we are making giving a validity to something that might not
Amplifying
happen.
it. Yeah.
We amplify.
But I do want to take this actually back to the previous question about the ICC. Again, we have to understand what the ICC possibilities are, and I want to read from the arrest warrant that were eventually issued in November. When the special prosecutor announced in May that he has requested for arrest warrants, he requested them against 3 Hamas leaders, Yihya Sinwar, Muhammad Def, and
Ismail Haniya.
Haniya, thank you, and Ismail Haniya. Now, Sinwar and Haniya had left.
Confirmed to be dead.
Yes. And Def, we do not know if he's dead or alive. So in November, when the chamber actually issued the arrest warrants, they did issue an arrest warrant against the Def. Now, in May, the special prosecutor mentioned that investigations of sexual violence are still ongoing. So he did not include that in the possible indictment. He said they are still looking into that. But in November, I think it's very important to read out these words. The chamber further found that while they were held captive in Gaza, some hostages, predominantly women, were subjected to sexual and gender-based violence, including forced penetration, forced nudity, and humiliating and degrading treatment. This is the ICC. This is not any Israeli official body. So again, there is a lot of confusion and lack of knowledge, and this had not gained enough traction, I think. That's our role, to know these facts and to raise the consciousness.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
I'm sorry.
But that's okay. I was actually going to end with you. But of course, feel free to, before you answer, to share what you were going to share is what does justice look like?
Okay. So I just wanted to finish the idea that I started. I think that we should, since we're talking about a universal problem, and as I said, in Israel, at least this function of dealing with the hostages coming back and victim survivors is functioning. I'm worried about other areas in the world in which there is no support, for, like the Yazidi women, like in South Sudan or wherever. And maybe our mission is, based on our experience, is to strive for more rigorous efforts of the free world to rehabilitate these women, to help them to get them out of these countries and rehabilitate them. So this is an issue that I'm very worried about. They have no support system. And maybe we should be the ones who will push for it globally. What is justice? Maybe I will talk about two aspects of justice. Justice, first of all, justice for the victims. The acknowledgement that they were abused, not to deny their experiences, horrific experiences, is justice. To help them restore their life, to help them rehabilitate their lives. I mean, supporting the means, giving the means, supporting them. This is justice. And the other notion of justice is, I would say, the opposite of impunity, bringing those perpetrators to trial. And this is a very complex issue. Sharon started to elaborate on it. We don't have time to talk about the complexity of the question, for instance, of retribution. Who will be indicted? We don't know who raped. So how do we deal with it in a mess, in a situation of mass perpetrators? I think we have solutions for at least to the attributing accountability to the field commanders who knew exactly what was going on, even if they were not aware at this specific moment that somebody was raping a woman, but they participated in a scheme of absolute dehumanizing the community that was attacked, and they took responsibility for any action of which is consisted with total dehumanization, and sexual abuse is definitely one way of dehumanizing, a major way of dehumanizing people. So this is justice. We have to think about how we deal with masses of defendants, how the court system, the domestic court system, should deal with hundreds of defendants. We don't have so many judges, we don't have so many prosecutors. Who will defend them? Will Israel pay for public defenders? Who will defend will give legal advice to the defendants? The public defender decided that they will not take part in defending these perpetrators. So what do we do with it? I believe that justice should be done according to the rules. And even if we have terrorists in hand, they should be tried according to the rules, and not just without legal defense, without. So this is another issue. Another big issue, and this might be my last remark. I think that we have a problem with definition of what exactly is sexual abuse in conflict-related areas. When we talk about, Ruth just mentioned that the ICC said that there was evidence of women being penetrated during. Is this do we really want to start dealing with the question whether there was a penetration or not, in a situation in which the whole idea is that they want to erase your sexuality? This is the core, this is the essence. So when we talk about regular sex offenses, this is absolutely an issue, if there was a penetration or not. How severe was the attack? But when you talk about sexual abuse in conflict-related areas, is it an issue? Or do we really think that stripping off the clothes and carrying a woman as a trophy of war is less severe than penetration? How do we break these horrendous attacks? So I think this is also an issue that should be dealt with and find another solution.
It's so vastly complicated. I feel like I could sit here and listen to all of you for hours. I'm so grateful on behalf of Israeli women, on behalf of Jewish women, on behalf of all women, for the work that you all are doing so tirelessly. So I thank you for being here. I thank everyone who registered today for wanting to learn and know. I want to close by saying we are so grateful for the three young women who are now in the arms of their families and safely in Israel. And I want to remember the 91 souls who remain under Gaza, and that we pray for their release, and that we pray that all will be afforded the privacy to move forward with their recovery. I invite everyone here to continue to follow us, both the Dinah Project and JWI will be presenting at the UN Commission on the Status of Women events in March. We will make those available also via stream. And just we're with you. And please know that. And thank you all for being with us
You.
today.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you all.